The lunch rush at Bellini's was always a storm of activity, and May found herself at its center once again. She balanced 3 plates up her left arm while her right hand grabbed the 4th from the kitchen counter. Table 7 salmon is missing. The side salad, she called to the line cook, who nodded without looking up from the sizzling pan in front of him. May wove through the maze of tables with practiced ease. The restaurant buzzed with the sounds of clinking glasses and business deals being closed. Bellini's wasn't just any restaurant. It was where the city's most powerful people came to be seen and to make things happen. Orchestra directors, museum, curators, wealthy donors, and corporate sponsors filled the tables daily, ordering expensive wines and discussing upcoming cultural events. "Here we are," May said with a warm smile as she set down each plate with precision in front of the 4 women at table 12. The scallop risotto, beef tenderloin, summer vegetable pasta, and the chef's special salmon. One woman barely glanced up from her phone. Another nodded without making eye contact. The third was deep in conversation about some gallery opening. Only the 4th woman, older than the others with kind eyes, actually looked at May and said, "Thank you, dear." "It," was the usual response. To most of these people, May was just part of the restaurant furniture, there to serve but not to be noticed. She refilled water glasses and disappeared again, moving on to her next table where a famous conductor was hosting potential donors. What none of them knew, what nobody at Bellini's knew, was that in less than 6 hours, May would be sitting at a piano across town, her fingers dancing across the keys with a skill that would have shocked everyone who thought they knew her. The evening shift ended at 9, and by 9:30, May had changed out of her black server's uniform into jeans and a comfortable sweater. She walked briskly through the cool night air, her backpack heavy with sheet music. The community center was a 20-minute walk from the restaurant, and she'd made this journey hundreds of times before. Mrs. Wu was locking up the front desk when May arrived. "Right on time as always," the older woman said, handing May a key. "Room 3 tonight, the heater's acting up in 4. "Thanks," May said, already heading down the hallway. "I'll lock up when I'm done." Room 3 was smaller than her usual practice room, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the upright piano pushed against the wall, not the finest instrument, with a few sticky keys and slightly out of tune, but worlds better than nothing. May set her backpack down and pulled out her notebook. She had 2 hours before the center officially closed, though Mrs. Wu always let her stay a bit longer. 2 precious hours to practice. She sat at the bench and closed her eyes, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. Then she began to play. Music flowed from her hands, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, filling the small room with sounds that transported her far away from her everyday life. She'd been teaching herself to play for nearly 6 years now, ever since her grandmother had passed away and left her the old upright piano that had stood in her living room for decades. The piano couldn't fit in May's tiny apartment, so she'd had to sell it, but not before promising herself she would keep playing somehow. That's how she'd found this place. The community center with practice rooms that could be rented for just $10 an hour. On a waitress's salary, even that was a stretch, but she cut corners elsewhere. No cable TV, no fancy coffee, clothes, from thrift shops, all so she could afford these hours with a piano. As a child, May had taken lessons briefly, but family finances had forced her to stop after less than a year. Her grandmother had always said she had a gift, but life had pulled her in other directions. After high school, college hadn't been an option. Her parents needed help with the family expenses, so she'd started working right away. But when her grandmother died and left her that piano, something awakened in May. She'd started with YouTube tutorials, teaching herself the basics again. Then came online forums where she could post recordings and get feedback from real musicians. She'd saved for months to afford a few precious lessons with a retired teacher, soaking up as much knowledge as she could. Now, at 28, she played with a passion and skill that would have earned her a spot in any conservatory, if she'd had the chance to apply years ago. But May didn't allow herself to think about what might have been. Instead, she focused on what was. These moments with the piano, when everything else fell away. She finished the Nocturne and moved on to Bach, her fingers navigating the complex patterns with growing confidence. She'd been working on this piece for weeks, and tonight something clicked. The music became less about the notes on the page and more about the feeling behind them. A knock on the door broke her concentration. "Sorry to interrupt," Mrs. Wu said, poking her head in. "But you sound wonderful tonight. I just had to tell you." May blushed. "Thank you. I think I'm finally getting this section right." "You know," Mrs. Wu said, leaning against the doorframe, "my nephew works at the music department at City College. They have better pianos there, and sometimes they let community members use the practice rooms. I could ask him about it." "That would be amazing," May said, her eyes lighting up at the thought of playing on a better instrument. "But I can only practice late at night after my shifts." "I'll see what he says," Mrs. Wu promised. "Now, I'm really heading out. Lock up. When you're done." After Mrs. Wu left, May turned back to the piano with renewed energy. She played for another hour, losing track of time as she worked through her pieces, making notes in her music where she needed to focus more attention. It was nearly midnight when she finally packed up her things and locked the community center door behind her. The night air had grown colder, and she wrapped her scarf tighter as she began the walk home. Her fingers were still moving, playing invisible keys against her thigh as she walked. In her mind, she could hear the music continuing, a constant soundtrack that followed her everywhere. Her apartment was small, just a studio with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was hers. Photos of her grandmother smiled down from the walls, along with a few framed pieces of sheet music that held special meaning. In one corner sat her keyboard, not a real piano, just an electric one with weighted keys that she practiced on when she couldn't get to the community center. She'd saved for 6 months to buy it secondhand. May set her alarm for 6 a.m., early enough to get in some practice on the keyboard before her lunch shift started tomorrow. As she got ready for bed, she hummed the Bach piece, still working out the tricky sections in her mind. None of her co-workers at Bellini's knew about her music. Why would they? It never came up, and May wasn't one to volunteer personal information. To them, she was just quiet, reliable May who never missed a shift and always remembered which guest was allergic to shellfish and who wanted their dressing on the side. Her manager, Rick, once commented that she had good hands when he noticed how she could carry multiple plates without a tray. If only he knew what those hands could really do. As she drifted off to sleep, May imagined a different life, one where she played for audiences instead of serving them, where people saw her instead of looking through her. But those were just dreams, and May had learned long ago not to expect dreams to come true. What she didn't know was that life sometimes has surprising turns planned, and hers was coming sooner than she could imagine. In less than a week, everything would change. The line between her two worlds would blur, and the music she kept hidden would refuse to stay in the shadows any longer. For now, though, she slept, her fingers occasionally twitching against the blanket, playing silent melodies in her dreams. Thursday evening at Bellini's was unusually hectic. The restaurant had been booked for a private event, a pre-concert reception for the City Symphony's board members and top donors. May had been assigned to work it alongside 5 other servers, and Rick, the manager, had been on edge all day. "This is a big deal, people," he said during the staff meeting before the event. "These are the kinds of folks who can make or break our reputation. I want everything perfect." The kitchen was preparing special appetizers that weren't on the regular menu. The bar had brought in champagne that cost more per bottle than May made in a day. Even the tablecloths were different, crisp white instead of the usual cream. "And remember," Rick added, looking at each server, "these people run the cultural scene in this city. Be invisible, but perfect." May nodded along with everyone else. Being invisible was something she had mastered long ago. By 6 o'clock, the restaurant had been transformed. Soft lighting created a warm glow, and flower arrangements centered each table. In the corner of the dining room stood a beautiful grand piano, a Steinway that had been rented for the evening. May couldn't help staring at it when she thought, no one was looking. It was magnificent, so much better than the tired upright at the community center. They've hired some fancy pianist from the symphony, her co-worker Tina whispered, noticing May's gaze. Supposed to play background music during the reception. May nodded and turned away from the piano. She had trays to arrange and water glasses to fill before the guests arrived. By 6:30, the room had begun to fill with men in expensive suits and women draped in jewelry that caught the light. May recognized many of them from regular lunch service, the chairman of the symphony board, several wealthy patrons, the music director. But tonight they weren't here for business lunches. Tonight was about music and money. The symphony's upcoming season needed funding, and these were the people who would provide it. May moved efficiently between the kitchen and the dining room, offering trays of appetizers and making sure wine glasses stayed full. No one really looked at her face. They saw the tray, took what they wanted, and continued their conversations. At 7 o'clock, Rick began to look anxious. He checked his watch repeatedly and kept glancing toward the door. May overheard him. On the phone, his voice tight with stress. "What do you mean he's sick? The reception has already started." "Well, can you send someone else?" "I see." "Yes, I understand, but—" When he hung up, Rick's face had gone pale. He pulled the event coordinator aside, and their urgent whispers carried across the room to where May was clearing empty glasses. "The pianist has food poisoning." "No, they don't have a replacement on such short notice. Everyone's already at the concert hall preparing for tomorrow." "Well, what are we supposed to do? These people are expecting music." May hesitated, her heart suddenly pounding. The Steinway gleamed in the corner, untouched. Before she could reconsider, she found herself walking toward Rick. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Rick barely glanced at her. "Not now, May. We have a situation." "I know. I overheard. The pianist isn't coming." She took a deep breath. "I can play." Now Rick looked at her, confusion clear on his face. "You what?" "I can play the piano," May repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm not professional, but I know classical music. I could at least provide some background music until you figure something out." Rick stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. The event coordinator looked skeptical. "You're a waitress," Rick said flatly. "Yes," May agreed, "but I also play piano." Rick exchanged a look with the coordinator, who shrugged helplessly. "We don't have many options here." "Fine," Rick said finally. "You have 5 minutes to prove you can do this. If it's not working, we'll switch to the sound system." May nodded and handed her serving tray to a bewildered Tina. Her hands were trembling slightly as she crossed the room to the piano. A few guests glanced curiously in her direction, probably wondering why a server was approaching the instrument. She sat down on the bench and took a moment to center herself. The keys felt different under her fingers, more responsive than what she was used to, with an action so smooth it almost played itself. She closed her eyes briefly, decided on a piece, and began to play. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room. May kept her focus on the keys, too nervous to look up and see the reactions. The piece was gentle and flowing, perfect background music that wouldn't overwhelm conversation. But it was also beautiful and complex enough to show that she could really play. As her fingers moved across the keys, the familiar calm that came with playing washed over her. The restaurant around her faded away. There was only the music, only this moment where she could finally show what she'd kept hidden for so long. When she finished the piece, May became aware of something strange. The room had gone quiet. She looked up to find dozens of pairs of eyes focused on her. Rick stood frozen by the bar, his mouth slightly open. The event coordinator was staring in disbelief. An older gentleman in the front of the room, the symphony board chairman, May realized with a jolt, was the first to break the silence. He began to applaud, and others quickly joined in. Flustered, May gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Then, not knowing what else to do, she transitioned into her next piece, a Bach prelude that she knew by heart. The conversations gradually resumed around the room, but she noticed people kept glancing in her direction. She was no longer invisible. She played for nearly 30 minutes, moving from one piece to the next. Her initial nerves had faded, replaced by a strange exhilaration. This was the first time she had played for an audience larger than Mrs. Wu at the community center, and on such a magnificent instrument. Every note rang out with a clarity she'd never experienced before. During a brief pause between pieces, May became aware of someone standing beside the piano. She looked up to find a tall man with silver hair watching her intently. With a start, she recognized him, Dmitri Volkov, the famously demanding conductor of the city symphony. She had served him lunch many times, but he had never really looked at her before today. "Don't stop," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. "That was Chopin you were playing just now?" May nodded. "Nocturne in E-flat major." "And how long have you played with the symphony?" he asked, clearly assuming she was the replacement pianist sent over. "Oh, I work here," she said, gesturing vaguely at her server's uniform. "I'm just filling in because the pianist couldn't make it." Volkov's eyebrows shot up. "You work here? As what?" "A waitress," May said, feeling her cheeks grow warm. "I've probably served you lunch before." The conductor studied her face. "Perhaps. I don't recall." He paused. "Where did you study?" May's embarrassment deepened. "I didn't, not formally. My grandmother left me her piano and I've been teaching myself. I practice at the community center when I can." Volkov's expression was impossible to read. For a moment he said nothing, and May feared she'd somehow offended him. Then he pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the piano. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, come to this address." He tapped the card. "Bring whatever music you have. I want to hear you play again." Before May could respond, he walked away, rejoining a group of patrons who immediately demanded his attention. May stared at the card in disbelief. The symphony's downtown office. Was this really happening? She had no time to process it as Rick appeared at her side, his earlier skepticism replaced with something like awe. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he said quickly. "They love it. The board chairman just told me this is the best entertainment they've had at these events." May nodded and returned to playing, though her mind was racing. For the rest of the evening, various guests approached the piano between pieces to express their appreciation or ask what she was playing. People who had looked through her for years were suddenly seeing her, really seeing her. When the event finally ended, Rick pulled her aside. "Why didn't you ever mention you could play like that?" he demanded. May shrugged. Nobody ever asked. As she helped clean up after the guests had gone, Tina and the other servers kept shooting her curious glances. Her quiet, predictable image had been shattered, and she wasn't sure how she felt about it. Part of her wanted to retreat back into invisibility, where things were simpler and expectations were clear. But as she picked up Volkov's card from the piano before leaving, she knew that wasn't an option anymore. Tomorrow would bring something new, something terrifying and wonderful. After years of playing for herself in empty rooms, she would play for one of the most respected conductors in the country. For the first time in her life, someone had heard the music she kept inside, and they wanted to hear more. May barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Volkov's stern face and felt the weight of his business card in her pocket. By morning, she had convinced herself that the whole thing had been a mistake, that he'd been caught up in the moment and would regret inviting her. Still, at 9 o'clock, she found herself standing in front of her closet, wondering what to wear to an audition she never expected to have. Her nicest outfit was the black pants and white shirt she wore for work, but that felt wrong for this occasion. Finally, she settled on a simple blue dress she'd bought for her cousin's wedding 2 years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was the best she had. The symphony office was downtown, a 30-minute bus ride from her apartment. As the city passed by outside the window, May flipped through the sheet music in her bag, wondering if she'd made the right selections. She had brought some Bach, Chopin, and a piece by Schubert that she'd been working on for months. Nothing too ambitious. She knew her limits. The building was intimidating, all glass and steel with the symphony's logo etched into the revolving doors. Inside, a receptionist looked up as May approached. "Can I help you?" I have an appointment with Maestro Volkov, May said, the words still feeling strange in her mouth. She held out the business card. My name is May Chen. The receptionist checked a calendar and nodded. Yes, I see it here. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Someone will meet you. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway lined with framed photographs of orchestras and soloists from years past. May recognized a few famous faces, musicians whose recordings she had studied. It seemed impossible that she was here, in this place where real musicians worked and performed. A young woman with a clipboard was waiting for her. You must be May, she said with a friendly smile. I'm Lucia, the maestro's assistant. He's running a few minutes late. Phone call with Berlin. You know how it is. May nodded as if she did know, though she had no idea what would prompt a call to Berlin or why it would make someone late. Come with me, Lucia continued. We'll get you set up in the rehearsal room. May followed her down the hallway, past offices where people were talking on phones or studying scores. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing, where they belonged. May felt like an imposter waiting to be discovered and thrown out. The rehearsal room was large, with high ceilings and sound-absorbing panels on the walls. In the center sat another Steinway, this one even more magnificent than the one at the restaurant. Make yourself comfortable, Lucia said. Maestro shouldn't be too long. Would you like some water? Yes, please, May said, her mouth suddenly dry. When Lucia left, May approached the piano cautiously, almost reverently. She set her bag of music on a nearby chair and gently pressed one key, listening to the pure tone that rang out in the quiet room. This instrument was perfectly maintained, probably tuned weekly. She sat on the bench and played a simple scale, getting a feel for the action of the keys. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the door open. When she looked up, Volkov was standing there, watching her with that same intense expression from the night before. Behind him was a woman May didn't recognize, elegant with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp eyes. This is her, Volkov said to the woman. Then to May, play something, whatever you were going to play first. No greeting, no pleasantries, just the command. May nodded and positioned her hands over the keys. She had planned to start with Bach, a safe choice, technically challenging but not overly emotional. But something made her change her mind at the last second. She began to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. It was a piece she loved, one that told a story through its music. Beginning simply, then building in complexity and emotion until its stormy conclusion. It was also, she realized too late, incredibly difficult and probably beyond her technical abilities in some sections. But once she started, there was no turning back. She played with all the feeling she could, knowing that what she lacked in formal training she might make up for in heart. When she reached the more challenging passages, she simplified a few of the runs, but maintained the piece's emotional core. When she finished, she kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to look up and see disappointment on their faces. Self-taught, you said? It was the woman speaking, her voice carrying a hint of an accent May couldn't place. Yes, May answered quietly. Look at me, Volkov said. May raised her eyes. This is Professor Liang, he said, gesturing to the woman. She runs our scholarship program and teaches at the conservatory. Professor Liang stepped forward. Your technique is uneven, she said bluntly. The left hand sometimes loses rhythm when the right is busy. Your pedaling is intuitive but not precise. And you simplified the coda. May nodded, her cheeks burning. She should never have come here. She wasn't good enough for this world. But, the professor continued, your musicality is unusual. You play with genuine emotion, not just the academic understanding of where expression should be. That cannot be taught so easily. Volkov grunted in agreement. Play something else. Bach, perhaps? For the next hour, they had her play various pieces, sometimes stopping her to request a different approach or to ask about her interpretation. They spoke to each other occasionally in technical terms May didn't understand, making notes on a pad of paper. Finally, Volkov nodded to Professor Liang, who set down her notes and looked directly at May. We have a special scholarship program, she explained, normally reserved for promising students who have already completed some formal training. But the maestro feels, and I agree, that you represent a special case. May's heart began to race. What kind of program? Private instruction twice weekly. Access to practice rooms, the opportunity to attend master classes with visiting artists, and eventually, if you progress well, the chance to audition for our Young Artists recital series. The room seemed to spin slightly. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. People who served lunch and lived in tiny apartments and practiced on community center pianos with sticky keys. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. Why would you offer this to me? Volkov's eyebrows rose slightly. Because talent should not be wasted, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Even raw, undisciplined talent like yours. There would be conditions, Professor Liang added. This would be intensive work. You would need to practice several hours daily, follow a structured program, unlearn some habits and develop new techniques. It would not be easy. And I work full-time, May said, reality crashing back. I have rent to pay, bills. The scholarship includes a small stipend, Professor Liang said. Not enough to live on, but enough to perhaps reduce your working hours. Many of our students teach piano to beginners to supplement their income. May tried to imagine herself teaching piano, passing on what she knew to others. It seemed presumptuous, yet strangely appealing. Can I think about it? She asked. Volkov frowned slightly, clearly not accustomed to having his offers met with hesitation. But Professor Liang nodded. Of course. This would be a significant change in your life. Take the weekend to consider it. Call me Monday. She handed May a card, and regardless of what you decide, you have remarkable natural talent. As May left the building, clutching the 2 business cards she'd been given, her mind whirled with possibilities and fears. She had been recognized, really seen, by people whose opinion actually mattered in the music world. But she was also terrified. What if she failed? What if she wasn't good enough? What if she gave up everything for this opportunity only to discover she didn't belong in that world? She was so distracted that she almost walked past Bellini's, where her afternoon shift would start in 20 minutes. The restaurant looked exactly the same as it always had, but somehow May felt like a different person walking through its doors. Rick spotted her immediately. There she is, our piano prodigy. May winced. News had clearly spread. Listen, Rick continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I had an idea. What if we started featuring you playing piano here once or twice a week? We could promote it, Piano Nights with May or something. It would be a huge draw, especially after how impressed those symphony people were. I don't know, May said, uncomfortable with the idea of being a gimmick. I'd have to think about it. Well, don't think too long, Rick said. This could be big for both of us. Oh, and Table 9 has been asking about you all day. The lady said she heard you play last night and wants to talk to you. May looked over to see an elegantly dressed older woman sitting alone at Table 9, sipping tea and reading a book. With a sense of unreality, May realized it was the woman from the night before, the one who had actually said thank you when May served her lunch. As May approached the table, the woman looked up and smiled. Warmly, "There you are," she said. "I was hoping to see you today. I wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed your playing last night. It was the highlight of a rather tedious event." "Thank you," May said, genuinely touched. "That's very kind." "Not kind. Honest," the woman corrected. "My name is Eleanor West. I used to teach at the conservatory before I retired, and I'd like to know your story if you're willing to share it." For a moment, May stood frozen, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Then, making a decision, she pulled out the chair opposite Mrs. West and sat down. "My name is May Chen," she said, "and I guess my story is just beginning." 3 months into her new life, May sat in practice room number 7 at the conservatory, staring at the same passage of music she'd been working on for 2 hours. Her fingers felt stiff, Her back ached, and frustration had settled in like an unwelcome guest. Again, she muttered to herself, positioning her hands over the keys. From the top of page 4, she began to play Beethoven's Sonata No. 8, the Pathétique, a piece Professor Liang had assigned 3 weeks ago. The opening was powerful and dramatic, building tension before releasing into a more delicate section. It was this transition that kept tripping her up. Her right hand needed to maintain the melody, while her left hand played a completely different rhythm beneath it. After another failed attempt, May closed the lid of the piano and rested her forehead against the cool wood. She had made a difficult choice, accepting the scholarship and cutting her hours at Bellini's to just 3 lunch shifts per week. Her bank account was feeling the pinch, even with the small stipend from the program and the 2 beginner students she'd started teaching on Sundays. But the financial strain wasn't the worst part. It was the constant feeling that she didn't belong here, surrounded by students who had been playing since they were old enough to sit at a bench, who could read complex scores as easily as she read a menu, who spoke the language of music theory as if they'd been born knowing it. A knock at the practice room door jolted her from these thoughts. She opened it to find Professor Liang standing there, elegant as always in her tailored clothes. "I thought I might find you here," the professor said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. "You've been practicing that sonata for hours." "I'm sorry if I'm bothering anyone," May said quickly. Professor Liang waved away the apology. "That's not why I'm here. I wanted to check your progress before tomorrow's master class." The master class. May's stomach clenched at the reminder. Renowned pianist Anton Dvorsky would be giving a class for selected students, and somehow, through Volkov's influence, she suspected, May had been included among them. She would have to play in front of him and the other students who would all be watching for mistakes from the waitress who didn't belong. "I'm not ready," May admitted. "This transition section, I can't get my hands to work independently." Professor Liang nodded, unsurprised. "This is where your lack of early training becomes apparent. You never developed the neurological pathways for this kind of independence when your brain was more plastic." She sat on the bench beside May. "Show me." May opened the piano again and played the troublesome section. Professor Liang watched her, hands closely. "Your left hand is anticipating the rhythm of the right," she observed. "It's subtle, but that's what's happening. Your brain wants both hands to be in sync." "How do I fix it?" May asked. "The same way you fix everything in music. Slowly, deliberately, repeatedly." Professor Liang took a pencil and marked something on the score. "Practice just these 4 measures, hands separately, then together at half speed. When you can play it perfectly 3 times in a row, increase the tempo slightly. It will come." May nodded, though doubt must have shown on her face. "You're being too hard on yourself," Professor Liang said, surprising May with this rare moment of warmth. "You've made remarkable progress in 3 months. Your Bach interpretation last week showed genuine understanding of counterpoint. But the other students have had years of advantages you didn't have," Professor Liang cut in. "They're not your competition. Your only measuring stick is yourself, where you were yesterday compared to today." After the professor left, May tried the approach she'd suggested, breaking down the troublesome passage into smaller segments and practicing with painful slowness. By the time the janitor knocked on her door to let her know the building was closing, she had made subtle but real progress. Outside, the night air was cool against her face. May checked her watch, almost 11. She'd missed the bus she usually took home and would have to wait 30 minutes for the next one. With a sigh, she headed toward the stop, her bag heavy with scores and theory books. As she waited, her phone buzzed with a text from Rick. "Got another request for you to play at the restaurant this weekend. Still saying no?" May put the phone away without answering. Rick had been pushing the piano nights idea since her first day at the conservatory, but she'd resisted. Professor Liang had strong opinions about students performing in venues beneath their potential, and May didn't want to disappoint her, but the extra money would help, and part of her missed playing music she actually enjoyed. rather than the technically challenging classical pieces that now filled her days. The bus arrived, nearly empty at this late hour. May took a seat by the window, watching the city roll by and thinking about how much her life had changed in such a short time. 3 months ago, she had been just a waitress who played piano in secret. Now she was a scholarship student at one of the city's most prestigious music programs, studying with famous teachers, preparing for a master class with a world-renowned pianist, and yet she still felt caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. When she reached her apartment, May was too tired to practice more, but too wired to sleep. She sat on her bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through music apps until she found what she was looking for: a recording of a jazz pianist playing a piece she'd always loved. As the fluid, improvisational notes filled her small room, she closed her eyes and remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfect technique or historical understanding. It was about feeling something and sharing that feeling with others. The conservatory's recital hall was intimidating even when empty. With 60 people filling its seats, it was terrifying. May sat in the front row alongside 5 other students, selected for the master class, each clutching their music and trying not to look as nervous as they felt. Anton Dvorsky, a powerfully built man with wild gray hair and intense eyes, sat at the grand piano on stage, demonstrating a passage from a Rachmaninoff concerto. His fingers moved with such speed and precision that they seemed barely to touch the keys. Yet the sound that emerged was thunderous. "You see," he said to the audience in his thick Eastern European accent, "the piano is not just an instrument. It is an orchestra beneath your hands. You must hear all the voices, all the instruments." May watched, mesmerized. This was what she aspired to, not just playing notes correctly, but creating entire worlds of sound. "Now," Dvorsky said, standing from the bench, "let us hear from our brave volunteers. First up," he consulted a list. May Chen, playing Beethoven's Pathétique. May's heart lurched. She had expected to go later after watching others perform. Now she would be first, with no chance to learn from others' mistakes or Dvorsky's feedback. As she walked to the piano, she felt the eyes of everyone in the room. These weren't restaurant patrons who might be impressed by any display of skill. These were musicians who would hear every hesitation, every unevenly weighted note. She sat at the bench and adjusted its height, then placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she froze, her mind suddenly blank. What if she couldn't remember the music? What if her hands wouldn't cooperate? What if everyone realized she was just pretending to be a real musician? Then she remembered what Mrs. West had told her over tea at Bellini's. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. May took a deep breath and began to play. The opening chords resonated through the hall, bold and dramatic. As she played, she tried to focus only on the music, not on the people watching or judging. When she reached the troublesome transition, she slowed down slightly, concentrating on keeping her left hand steady while the right hand carried the melody. It wasn't perfect, but she made it through without falling apart. By the time she reached the final movement, she had almost forgotten about the audience. She was playing for herself, for the joy of bringing this beautiful piece to life. When she struck the final chord, there was a moment of complete silence before polite applause filled the room. Dvorsky approached the piano, his expression unreadable. "You are the waitress, yes? The one Volkov discovered?" May nodded, unsure how to respond to being defined this way. Dvorsky turned to address the audience. "What did you hear?" A young man in the second row raised his hand. Technically, there were several issues. The left hand was unsteady in the transition to the second theme. The pedaling was sometimes too heavy, and the tempo varied too much. In the final movement. "All true," Dvorsky agreed. "What else?" A woman spoke up. "I think the interpretation lacked historical understanding. Beethoven requires more structural rigidity than was displayed." Dvorsky nodded again, and May's heart sank further with each criticism. "Anyone else?" Dvorsky asked. After a pause, an older student at the back stood up. "I heard someone playing, with genuine emotion," he said quietly. Yes, there were technical flaws, but there was also music happening. Dvorsky's face broke into a sudden smile. Exactly. He turned to May. Young lady, your technique needs work. This is obvious, but you have something many technically perfect pianists lack. You have heart. You play as if you mean it. He sat beside her on the bench. May I show you something? For the next 20 minutes, he worked with her on specific passages, demonstrating techniques for hand independence, suggesting fingerings that would make difficult transitions easier, showing her how to use the pedal more effectively. His teaching was direct but kind, focused on making her better rather than pointing out her shortcomings. When the next student was called up, May returned to her seat, her mind swimming with new information and techniques to practice. As she listened to the others play, all technically more proficient than she was, she noticed that Dvorsky gave similar feedback to several of them. Yes, very clean, very accurate. But where is the music? Where is the feeling? After the masterclass ended, students gathered in small groups discussing the experience. May stood apart, gathering her things, when a tall young man approached her. She recognized him as Tao, one of the conservatory's star pupils known for his technical brilliance and competition wins. Your Beethoven was interesting, he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't exactly a compliment. I've never heard the Pathétique played quite that way before. I'm still learning, May said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Obviously, Tao replied with a thin smile. It must be nice to have Volkov's special attention. The rest of us had to earn our places here through years of proper training and auditions. Before May could respond, Professor Liang appeared beside them. Tao, I believe you have a chamber music rehearsal starting in 5 minutes, she said pointedly. With a slight bow to the professor, Tao walked away, leaving May with burning cheeks and a tight feeling in her chest. Don't let it trouble you, Professor Liang said once he was gone. Jealousy is unfortunately common in music circles. Jealousy? May repeated, confused. What does he have to be jealous of? He's brilliant. And you received 20 minutes of personal attention from Dvorsky, while he received 5. Professor, Liang said simply. In this world, attention is currency. As they walked together toward the practice rooms, Professor Liang asked, Will you continue with the Beethoven for your midterm recital, or would you prefer to select something else? The midterm recital. Another hurdle May had been trying, not to think about. In 6 weeks, she would have to perform a 10-minute program in front of the entire department, students, faculty, and guests. I think I should continue with the Beethoven, May said, remembering Dvorsky's advice. I've started to understand it now. Professor Liang nodded approvingly. A wise choice. Build on what you've begun rather than starting something new. She paused outside practice room 7. 2 hours today, I think. Focus on the sections Dvorsky highlighted. As the professor walked away, May entered the practice room with mixed emotions. The master class had been both humiliating and inspiring. She had been exposed as the amateur she was, yet also encouraged by one of the greatest pianists in the world. She sat at the piano and opened the score, finding the section they had worked on together. As she positioned her hands over the keys, she felt a new determination growing within her. She might never be as technically perfect as Tao and the others who had been training since childhood, but she could work harder than any of them. And maybe, if Dvorsky was right, she already had something they were still trying to find. 6 months after that fateful evening at Bellini's, May stood backstage at the Grand Concert Hall, peering through a small gap in the curtains. The auditorium was filling with people dressed in their finest. Tuxedos, evening gowns, glittering jewelry. She recognized some of the faces, regular customers from the restaurant, faculty from the conservatory, fellow students. But many were strangers, drawn by the unusual story that had been featured in the local newspaper. From serving tables to center stage, Waitress becomes piano sensation. Nervous? Mrs. West appeared beside her, elegant in a deep blue dress, her silver hair swept up. Terrified, May admitted, stepping back from the curtain. I think I might throw up. Perfectly normal, Mrs. West said with a smile. I threw up before my first major performance, and my fifth, and my 12th. Over the past months, Eleanor West had become May's mentor and friend. When Professor Liang's demanding teaching style had pushed May to her limits, Mrs. West had been there with encouragement and practical advice drawn from her 50 years as a performer and teacher. "What if I forget the music?" May asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if my mind goes blank in the middle of the concerto?" "Then you'll improvise brilliantly until you find your way back," Mrs. West said calmly. "You know this music in your bones now, May. Trust yourself." May smoothed the fabric of her borrowed concert dress, another kindness from Mrs. West. Black with subtle sequins that caught the light. It made her look like a real performer, not a waitress pretending to be something she wasn't. 5 minutes, Ms. Chen. The stage manager poked his head into the waiting area. "I'll be in the front row," Mrs. West said, giving May's hand a squeeze. "Just like in rehearsal, find my face if you need an anchor." As Mrs. West left, Maestro Volkov entered, already dressed to conduct. His face was serious as always, but there was a warmth in his eyes that May had come to recognize over months of working together. "The hall is full," he said. "Many important people are here tonight." "No pressure," May muttered, trying to steady her breathing. Volkov almost smiled. "Pressure makes diamonds," he said. "Remember what we discussed. In the second movement, don't rush. Let the music breathe. And in the cadenza, I know," May nodded. "Make it my own, but respect Rachmaninoff's intentions." "Good." Volkov checked his watch. "It is time. Are you ready?" "No," May said honestly. "But let's do it anyway." They walked together toward the stage door. As they waited for their cue, May thought about the journey that had brought her here, the countless hours of practice, the theory lessons that had made her head spin, the moments of doubt and frustration when she'd nearly given up. But also the breakthroughs, the gradually deepening understanding of music, and the rare but precious moments when she'd felt she truly belonged in this world. The stage door opened. Volkov stepped out first, greeted by applause. Then May followed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The lights were blinding, the audience a sea of shadowy figures. She walked to the gleaming concert grand piano at center stage, adjusted the bench, and sat down. The orchestra members, dressed all in black, waited with their instruments poised. Volkov raised his baton, made eye contact with May, and gave the smallest of nods. The orchestra began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, dark, rolling chords that set the tone for the emotional journey to come. May listened, counting measures, preparing for her entrance. When her moment came, she began with the famous sequence of chords that grow from soft to thundering. For the first few minutes, she played almost automatically, muscle memory taking over as her conscious mind wrestled with nerves. But gradually, as the first movement developed, she began to relax into the music. This piece that had once seemed impossibly difficult was now a part of her, as familiar as her own heartbeat. The piano and orchestra conversed, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint. May found herself responding to the subtle cues from the string section, adjusting her tempo and dynamics to blend with their sound. This was what Volkov had tried to teach her, not just playing the notes, but making music with others. As she reached the lyrical second theme, May looked up briefly and found Mrs. West's face in the front row. The older woman gave her an encouraging smile. Next to her sat Professor Liang, her expression focused and analytical as always. And there, a few rows back, was that Rick from Bellini's? He'd come after all, despite their disagreement about the piano nights that had led to May finally quitting the restaurant 2 months ago. The first movement ended with a flourish, and there was a brief pause before the second began. This was May's favorite part of the concerto, achingly beautiful, with a melody that seemed to speak of longing and hope intertwined. As she played the opening theme, she thought of her grandmother, whose piano had started her on this path. Would she be proud of her granddaughter now, playing on this grand stage? The audience was forgotten as May lost herself in the music. The months of technical work faded into the background, leaving only the pure emotion of the piece. This was what had drawn her to the piano in the first place, the ability to express feelings too complex for words. The final movement arrived with its famously demanding passages. May's fingers flew across the keys, finding the notes almost without conscious thought. When she reached the cadenza, the solo section where the pianist could display their virtuosity, she added subtle variations to the written notes, making the piece her own while honoring its essence. The concerto built toward its powerful conclusion. Piano and orchestra joined in a surge of sound that filled the hall. With the final triumphant chords, May felt something release within her. All the doubt, all the fear, all the feeling of not belonging, washed away in that moment of musical completion. There was a beat of silence when the last note faded. Then the audience erupted in applause. Volkov extended his hand to May, helping her rise for a bow. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands, a sign of respect from musicians to a soloist. As May looked out at the standing audience, she felt oddly calm. This moment, one she couldn't have imagined a year ago, felt right somehow, as if she had found her true place in the world. Backstage after the performance, people crowded around to congratulate her. Professor Liang offered rare praise for her dynamics in the second movement. Mrs. West hugged her tightly, too moved for words. Even Tao, her conservatory rival, grudgingly admitted her cadenza had been interesting. As the crowd thinned, May found a quiet corner to catch her breath. She had done it, performed a major concerto with an orchestra in front of hundreds of people. The waitress who had practiced on a community center piano had become a real musician. "Excuse me, Ms. Chen?" A woman in an elegant suit approached, extending a business card. "I'm Jin Park from Pacific Arts Management. We represent classical musicians throughout Asia and North America. I'd love to discuss your future plans when you have a moment." May took the card, stunned. "My future plans?" "Yes. There's considerable interest in your story and your talent. We could arrange a small recital tour, perhaps some teaching engagements. Nothing too demanding while you complete your studies, of course." Before May could respond, Volkov appeared at her side. "Ms. Park," he said with a nod, "I see you found our newest discovery." "Indeed," the woman smiled. "I was just telling Ms. Chen that her unique background and natural musicality make her very marketable." "May is not a product to be marketed," Volkov said firmly. "She is an artist still developing her voice." "Of course," Ms. Park replied smoothly. "That's precisely what makes her interesting. The journey itself, from waitress to concert pianist, is what audiences find compelling." May listened to them discuss her, as if she weren't present, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort. Was that all she was? A novelty? An interesting story? Or was there something in her playing that was truly valuable beyond the narrative of her unusual path? As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. West appeared and gently led May away from the conversation. "Don't worry about all that business now," she said. "Tonight is for celebrating." They walked together toward the dressing room, passing a group of young children who had attended the concert with their music school. One little girl, no more than 7, looked up at May with wide eyes. "You played so beautifully," she said shyly. "I'm learning piano too." May knelt down to the child's level. "Thank you. How long have you been playing?" 6 months, the girl answered. "My teacher says I need to practice more." "Teachers always say that," May said with a smile. "But you know what's most important? Loving the music. If you love it, the practice doesn't feel so hard." The girl nodded, solemnly. "I loved your playing. Maybe someday I can play like you." "Maybe you'll play even better," May said. As they continued to the dressing room, Mrs. West gave May a knowing look. "That's what it's really about, isn't it? Passing it on, sharing the joy." May nodded, thinking of her own journey. "I never expected any of this," she said, gesturing around at the concert hall. "A year ago I was serving lunch and practicing on a piano with sticky keys. And now?" May paused, considering. "Now I feel like I've found where I belong. Not because I'm suddenly good enough or because important people know my name, But because I understand what music is for, it's not about being perfect or impressive. It's about connecting. With yourself, with others, with something larger. Mrs. West smiled. That, my dear, is what makes you an artist, not just a pianist. Later that night, after the reception had ended and the concert hall had emptied, May found herself alone on the stage. The cleaning staff had let her stay just for a few minutes, understanding her reluctance to leave. She sat at the piano that had been the center of the evening's performance and gently played a simple melody, the first piece her grandmother had taught her as a child. No grand techniques or difficult passages, just a sweet, uncomplicated tune that carried memories of a warm kitchen and patient hands guiding hers. As the final notes faded into the empty hall, May closed the piano lid and stood up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more music to learn, technique to refine, decisions about her future to make. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, she felt ready to walk it with confidence. The waitress who had hidden her talent for so long had finally stepped into the light. And in doing so, she had discovered that music wasn't about where you came from or how you learned. It was about what you had to say and how honestly you could say it. That was a language May now spoke fluently with no need for translation.